The fluorescent lights of the hotel lobby hummed a monotonous, soul-crushing tune, a sterile symphony of efficiency that grated on Ozzy Osbourne's very essence. It was a stark, jarring contrast to the feedback-laced anthems that usually filled his world. He was navigating the polished marble floor, a seemingly endless sea of beige, cream, and muted taupe, feeling distinctly like a bat that had taken a wrong turn and ended up in a sanitized bird sanctuary. The air, thick with the scent of expensive, generic potpourri and cleaning chemicals, was an assault on senses accustomed to sweat, smoke, and spilled beer. His long, dark coat, a familiar shroud of black in this ocean of blandness, swirled around his ankles with each shuffling, deliberate step. His trademark round sunglasses, perched on his nose, were less a rock star affectation today and more a necessary shield, protecting his eyes from the offensively cheerful morning light that streamed through the lobby's cathedral-like windows. At 70-something, the self-proclaimed Prince of Darkness had learned, sometimes reluctantly, to appreciate the quiet moments, the lulls between the roaring chaos of his life on the road. But quiet didn't mean invisible, and it certainly didn't mean he was just any old pensioner out for a morning stroll. He was flanked by his personal security guard, a mountain of a man named Frank. Frank was a study in contrast to Ozzy. Where Ozzy was all theatrical flair and shambling grace, Frank was a bastion of stoic professionalism. He had been with Ozzy for over a decade, a silent shadow who understood the delicate, often chaotic balance of Ozzy's public and private life. He knew when to intervene and when to let Ozzy be Ozzy. They were on a mission, a quest of vital importance, navigating the treacherous lobby to reach the hotel's quaint, ridiculously overpriced coffee shop for a pre-soundcheck caffeine infusion. A small, devoted cluster of fans had gathered near the entrance, a testament to his enduring legacy. They were a motley crew, a pair of young metalheads, barely out of their teens, in faded Black Sabbath shirts, a woman in her 40s with purple-streaked hair and a well-worn No More Tours t-shirt, a tour she'd likely attended decades ago, and a couple of older rockers who had clearly been with him since the very beginning, their faces etched with the same lines of time and experience as his own. Ozzy, ever the showman despite the early hour, offered a small, wobbly wave and a mumbled, "God bless you all," his Birmingham accent still thick and unmistakable, despite decades spent in America. A young girl, pushed forward by her father, shyly held out a vinyl copy of Blizzard of Oz. Ozzy stopped, took the marker Frank offered, and carefully scrawled his name across the iconic cover. "Stay crazy," he whispered to her, a genuine twinkle in his eye. It was a scene that had played out in countless cities across the globe, a familiar, cherished dance of adoration and appreciation. The hotel's own security, however, was a different breed entirely. They were stiff, uniformed automatons, marching to the beat of a corporate drum that was utterly alien to Ozzy's world. They carried an air of self-importance that grated on his very soul, a rigid adherence to rules for rules' sake. One in particular, a man whose beige uniform was stretched taut over a burgeoning gut, seemed to have taken a personal exception to the rock legend's presence. His name tag, polished to a high sheen, read Henderson. His eyes, small and cold like chips of granite, tracked Ozzy's every move with a predatory focus. He stood with his chest puffed out, a walking embodiment of petty authority. As Ozzy, Frank, and the small, lingering bubble of their presence neared the coffee shop, Henderson stepped forward, his body language a wall of obstruction. He raised a hand, palm out, in a gesture of officious, unquestionable authority. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you and your entourage to use the service entrance. We can't have you causing a scene and disturbing the other guests." The word entourage, used to describe a couple of loyal fans and his one guard, was laced with a thick, syrupy condescension. If you're enjoying this glimpse into the world of a rock and roll legend, a simple click of the like button would be amazing. It lets me know you're out there and ready for the chaos to unfold. Frank, ever the professional, immediately stepped between Ozzy and the guard, his voice a low, calm rumble. "My client is a registered guest at this 5-star hotel. He has every right to be here. We are simply going for a coffee." But Ozzy, who had been on the verge of a peaceful, caffeine-fueled reverie, picturing a steaming mug and perhaps a sneaky biscuit, felt a familiar spark ignite deep in his chest. It was an old, rebellious flame, the same spark that had fueled anthems of defiance and alienation for over 5 decades. It was the spark that had refused to be extinguished by decades of excess, critics, or the simple passage of time. He gently pushed Frank's formidable arm aside and shuffled closer to Henderson, his movements deceptively slow, almost like a predator sizing up its prey. He peered over the top of his sunglasses, his dark eyes, surprisingly clear and intensely focused, locking onto the guards. "A scene," he mumbled, his voice a low, dangerous growl that had filled stadiums. "You think I'm going to cause a scene? I'm going for a bloody coffee, mate, not biting the head off a bat." The small crowd of fans gasped, a collective intake of breath, before a few of them snickered. This was the Ozzy they knew and loved. Henderson's face, however, remained a mask of stony, unimpressed disapproval. "We have a certain decorum to maintain, Russ, sirs." The way he spat the last word, dripping with a potent cocktail of disdain and condescension, was the final straw. The spark in Ozzy's chest roared into a full-blown, glorious inferno. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken energy, charged with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for the moment before a blistering guitar solo. The fans held their breath, their phones now discreetly raised, sensing that this was no ordinary celebrity encounter. This was an event. Frank, though his jaw was clenched, knew better than to intervene when Ozzy got that particular look in his eye. He'd seen it before, and he knew that trying to stop it was like trying to stop a hurricane with a tennis racket. Henderson, for his part, seemed to puff out his chest even further, a small, smug smile playing on his lips. In his mind, he was a hero, a lone guardian of order against the forces of rock and roll chaos. He had faced down rowdy teenagers on prom night, and entitled businessmen complaining about the thread count of their sheets. This aging rock star, with his shaky hands and mumbled speech, would be no different. He had fundamentally, catastrophically, underestimated the Prince of Darkness, and in doing so, he had unwittingly set the stage for a comeback that would echo through the halls of rock and roll lore for years to come. Ozzy let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer, a maestro of dramatic timing, letting the tension build to an almost unbearable peak. He then slowly, deliberately, reached up and took off his sunglasses. Without the iconic round frames, his eyes seemed both older, etched with the roadmap of a life lived to the absolute extreme, and more intense, holding a mischievous, almost feral glint that was instantly recognizable to anyone who had ever seen him command a stage. He blinked once, twice, as if adjusting to the harsh reality of the beige-clad man standing before him, a man who represented everything he had spent a lifetime rebelling against. Then, in a voice that was suddenly, shockingly clear and steady, a voice that had once been described as a siren for the apocalypse, he spoke. "Decorum. Did you just say decorum? You want to talk to me about decorum?" He took a shuffling step closer, deliberately invading Henderson's personal space. The guard, to his credit, didn't flinch, but a flicker of uncertainty, a tiny crack in his facade of authority, appeared in his eyes. "Let me tell you something about decorum, Mr. Henderson," Ozzy continued, his voice rising with a theatrical flair he had perfected over 50 years. "I've been thrown out of better places than this for things you couldn't even imagine in your wildest, most beige-tinted dreams. I've trashed hotel rooms that cost more than your yearly salary, not because I was angry, but because the wallpaper was boring. I've been arrested in more countries than you've probably ever visited, for offences ranging from the absurd to the truly magnificent. I've seen things that would make your hair stand on end, done things that would make a saint weep, and forgotten more about what it means to be alive than you'll ever know. And you," he paused, poking a surprisingly steady, ring-clad finger into Henderson's taut chest, making the guard rock back on his heels, "have the unmitigated audacity to talk to me about decorum because I want a cup of coffee." The fans, his loyal flock, erupted in a chorus of cheers and unrestrained laughter. Henderson's face was now a mottled shade of crimson, his carefully constructed authority crumbling like a sandcastle against a tidal wave with each word Ozzy uttered. But Ozzy wasn't finished. Oh no, he was just warming up. He took a step back, a wide, almost manic grin spreading across his face, the grin of a chaos artist who had just found his perfect canvas. He looked at his fans, giving them a conspiratorial wink, then turned his attention back to the flustered, speechless guard. "Let me give you a real lesson in decorum, Mr. Henderson. A real-world lesson." With a theatrical slowness, he began to unbutton his long black coat. Frank took a half-step forward, a flicker of genuine concern on his face. He'd seen Ozzy do many unpredictable things, and undressing in a hotel lobby wasn't off the table. But Ozzy waved him off with a flick of his wrist, with a dramatic flourish that would have made Liberace proud. He shrugged off the heavy coat, letting it fall into Frank's waiting hands. He stood there, revealed in a simple, slightly wrinkled black t-shirt. But it wasn't just any t-shirt. Emblazoned across the chest, in bold, stark, unapologetic white letters, were the words, "I'm Ozzy Osbourne. Who the fuck are you?" The lobby, for a split second, was silent, and then it exploded. It was a symphony of delighted chaos. The fans were roaring with laughter, howling with pure joy, their phone cameras flashing like 1,000 tiny lightning bolts, capturing the moment for posterity. Even a few of the hotel staff, who had been watching the scene unfold from a safe distance behind potted plants and luggage carts, couldn't suppress their smiles. A bellhop dropped a bag, his laughter echoing in the sudden cacophony. Henderson stood frozen, his mouth agape, his face a kaleidoscope of embarrassment, fury, and dawning horror. He had tried to put a rock and roll legend in his place, and in return, he had been immortalized as the punchline to a story that would be told and retold by Ozzy fans for generations. Ozzy, for his part, simply grinned, took back his coat from a now smirking Frank, and with a final, triumphant nod to his adoring audience, shuffled into the coffee shop, leaving a trail of glorious, unadulterated chaos in his wake. Inside the blessedly quiet coffee shop, the scent of roasting beans a welcome antidote to the lobby's sterility, Ozzy sank into a plush armchair. Frank stood guard by the door for a moment before joining him, a slow, appreciative smile finally spreading across his face. "You know," Frank said, shaking his head, "for a second there, I thought you were actually going to take all your clothes off." Ozzy cackled, a wheezing, genuine sound of pure mirth. "Don't tempt me, Frank. It's not even noon." He leaned his head back, the adrenaline from the encounter beginning to subside, replaced by a deep sense of satisfaction. The bloke had it coming, didn't he? "Decorum," he scoffed, mimicking Henderson's pinched tone. "People like that, they live in a grey world. They want everyone else to live in it too. They see a bit of colour, and they want to paint it beige." A young barista, who had witnessed the whole thing, approached their table, her eyes wide with awe. "Mr. Osbourne," she stammered. "Whatever you want, it's on the house. Seriously, that was the greatest thing I've ever seen." Ozzy smiled warmly. "Just a black coffee, love, and maybe a bit of that lemon drizzle cake." The story of the t-shirt, predictably, went viral with the speed of a power cord. The photos and videos captured by the fans in the lobby spread across social media like wildfire. Ozzy vs Henderson became a trending topic on Twitter within the hour. Memes were born. Henderson's stunned face photoshopped into famous historical scenes, the t-shirt's text overlaid on pictures of confused cats and world leaders. The hotel, initially horrified by the breach in their precious decorum, was quickly overwhelmed by the public reaction. Their social media pages were flooded with praise for Ozzy and ridicule for Henderson. In a surprisingly savvy move, the management team leaned into the newfound fame. By evening, they had announced a new cocktail in their bar, the Prince of Darkness, a potent, bubbling mix of black vodka, Chambord, and a secret, bat-crazy ingredient, served with a pair of wax fangs. Henderson, however, was not so fortunate. He became an overnight internet laughingstock. He was quietly and unceremoniously transferred to a less public-facing position within the hotel chain, a beige man destined for a beige office in a forgotten basement. For Ozzy, the incident was a shot of pure, undiluted adrenaline. It was a potent reminder that even in his golden years, he still had the power to shake things up, to challenge the mundane and the ordinary. Frank showed him his phone, scrolling through the endless feed of posts. Ozzy squinted at the tiny screen, laughing at a particularly clever meme involving Henderson and the Queen's Guard. The energy from the encounter carried him through soundcheck and into the concert that night. The arena was a sold-out sea of black t-shirts and raised fists, a pulsing, living entity thrumming with anticipation. When Ozzy took the stage, The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a wave of sound that washed over him and filled him with a familiar, primal energy. It was the sound he had lived for his entire life. He launched into Crazy Train. His voice, though weathered by time and a lifetime of excess, still held the raw power and untamed emotion that had made him a legend. The crowd sang along to every word, their voices a thunderous chorus of devotion. But tonight, there was something different in the air, a new current of electricity, a shared secret between Ozzy and his tens of thousands of fans. In the middle of the set, during a brief pause between songs as the band wiped sweat from their brows, a fan in the front row held up a homemade, crudely lettered sign. Ozzy peered into the darkness, and then the spotlight operator, sensing a moment, illuminated it. On the cardboard, in thick black marker, were the words, "I'm a fan. Who the fuck is Henderson?" Ozzy squinted, trying to make out the words in the glare of the stage light. When he finally deciphered the message, he threw his head back and let out a hearty, cackling laugh that echoed through the massive arena. The crowd, seeing the sign and Ozzy's reaction, erupted in a fresh wave of cheers. The story had already become a part of their shared history, a new chapter in the epic, ever-unfolding saga of Ozzy Osbourne. He grabbed the microphone, a wide, joyful grin still plastered on his face. "You know," he began, his voice a mix of amusement and genuine affection, "I've been doing this for a long, long time. I've seen it all, I've done it all, and I've met a lot of interesting people along the way." He paused, letting the anticipation build. "But I have to say, Mr. Henderson from the hotel this morning, he was a special kind of wanker, wasn't he?" The crowd roared in gleeful agreement. "But you know what?" Ozzy continued, his voice growing more serious, the showman making way for the man. "It's not about the Hendersons of the world. It's about this. It's about you." He pointed a shaking finger out at the sea of faces, his expression a mixture of profound gratitude and love. "You're the reason I'm still up here. You're the reason I'm still alive. You are my bloody family." He then launched into "Mama, I'm coming home," and the arena was filled with a powerful, emotional energy. Thousands of phone flashlights swayed in the darkness like a galaxy of stars. The fans sang along, their voices cracking with emotion. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated connection, a testament to the enduring power of music and the unbreakable bond between an artist and his audience. The concert continued in a blaze of glory, a whirlwind of classic hits, blistering solos, and dazzling pyrotechnics. Ozzy, fueled by the love of his fans and the lingering thrill of his earlier confrontation, gave the performance of a lifetime. He was a force of nature, a living, breathing embodiment of rock and roll. After the final encore, as the last feedback-drenched notes of Paroid faded into the night, Ozzy stood on the stage, drenched in sweat, his chest heaving. He looked out at the cheering, stomping crowd, a feeling of overwhelming gratitude washing over him. He had faced down his own demons, battled addiction, and defied the odds time and time again, and he was still here, still standing, still rocking. He raised his arms in a final triumphant gesture, and the crowd roared back, a sound that was more than just applause. It was a declaration of love, a primal scream of solidarity. Back in the organized chaos of his dressing room, surrounded by his family and crew, Ozzy was buzzing with an almost manic energy. Sharon, his wife and manager, a force of nature in her own right, was on the phone, her voice a masterclass in controlled fury and sharp-witted negotiation. "Yes, I know it's all over the internet. No, I don't think he'll be pressing charges for..." "What? Verbal assault with a t-shirt? Are you serious? Let him try. The publicity would be fantastic." She rolled her eyes and hung up the phone with a decisive click. She looked at Ozzy, who was grinning like a Cheshire cat, and a fond, exasperated smile played on her lips. "You're a bloody menace, you know that." Ozzy just shrugged, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "He started it," he mumbled, taking a long sip of water. "All I wanted was a coffee." The next morning, as they were checking out of the hotel, a new security guard was at the door. He was young, barely in his 20s, with a nervous smile and a clear case of hero worship. As Ozzy and his entourage passed, the young guard snapped to attention and gave a crisp, if slightly shaky, salute. "Mr. Osbourne," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "It's an honor, sir. And, thanks." From all of us. Ozzy paused and looked at the young man. He saw the genuine admiration in his eyes, the same look he had seen in the faces of his fans for decades. He reached out and patted the young guard on the shoulder. "Keep it real, son," he said, his voice a gentle growl. "And don't ever let the bastards get you down." As they walked out of the hotel and into the waiting car, Ozzy felt a sense of profound peace settle over him. The world was still full of Hendersons, of small-minded people who tried to impose their own bland, beige version of reality on everyone else. But as long as there were still people who believed in the power of music, in the importance of being true to yourself, in the glorious, chaotic, and beautiful messiness of life, then the Prince of Darkness would always have a home, and he would always, always have the last laugh. The legend, it seemed, was far from over. In fact, it was just getting another epic chapter. And somewhere, in a quiet beige office, a man named Henderson was probably wishing he had just let the rock star have his damn coffee. The tour continued, and the legend grew with it. The t-shirt incident became the tour's unofficial mascot, a running joke that bound them all together. At every show, there were more and more homemade "Who the fuck is Henderson" shirts. It became a badge of honor, a symbol of their shared defiance. The final show of the tour was in his hometown of Birmingham. The energy in the arena was electric, a homecoming for the local boy who had conquered the world. As he stood in the wings, waiting to go on, he could hear the crowd chanting his name. It was a sound that resonated deep in his bones, a sound that brought him right back to the smoky pubs and dingy clubs where it had all begun. He had come a long way from the working-class streets of Aston, from the factories and the poverty. He had lived a life that was bigger and wilder than he could have ever imagined. And through it all, through the highs and the lows, the triumphs and the tragedies, he had always been himself, unapologetically, gloriously, and sometimes disastrously. He had been Ozzy. For the final encore, he walked out onto the stage wearing not his usual flamboyant stage costume, but a simple black t-shirt. The crowd, seeing the familiar white letters, erupted in a deafening, heartfelt roar. "I'm Ozzy Osbourne," the shirt proclaimed. And as he stood there, bathed in the adoration of his hometown crowd, he didn't need to ask the second question. Everyone in that arena, and indeed, everyone who had ever been touched by his music, knew exactly who he was. He was a legend. He was a survivor. He was the Prince of fucking Darkness. And no one, not even a man in a beige uniform, could ever take that away from him. As the final notes of Changes played, a song of reflection and vulnerability, a single spotlight illuminated him. He stood alone, his arms outstretched, a wide, beatific smile on his face. The story of Henderson and the t-shirt would forever be a part of his legacy, a testament to his wit, his spirit, and his enduring connection with his fans. It was a story that proved that even after all these years, Ozzy Osbourne was still the undisputed king of the comeback. And as the crowd chanted his name, their voices rising in a single powerful chorus that shook the very foundations of the building, one thing was clear: the Prince of Darkness still reigned supreme, and he wouldn't have it any other way. I truly hope you enjoyed this journey into a legendary rock and roll moment. If this story struck a chord with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd take a moment to leave a like. It means the world to know you were here, sharing in the chaos and the triumph. Thank you for reading.